Good evening, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this evening's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. It's Tuesday, the 7th of February 2023, and we're in the Walton Suite in Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:32. My name is Councillor Caroline Brooke and I'm chairperson of the committee. This meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. If you're joining us online, please turn your camera and microphone off until your item, and can everyone please ensure mobiles are on silent or switched off. Please can I remind members to use their microphones and speak directly into them. And please do not turn away when speaking, otherwise your comments won't be properly picked up on the recording. In the unlikely event it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions given to you by our team. And can I welcome the members of the public that we have here this evening, the officers and councillors, and can I also welcome Chief Inspector John Turton, who is joining us for our annual review of the Community Safety Partnership. We have purposely moved the meeting forwards to catch you before you retire, because you've been with us and done such a sterling job. We didn't want to miss out on this last opportunity. So we will hand over to you shortly. So thank you for joining us this evening. So turning to the agenda, Matthew, do we have any apologies this evening?
Good evening, Chair, members. So we've had apologies from Councillor Laming, who's been replaced by Councillor Rutter, and we're also joined by Councillor Godfrey this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks, Matthew. Do we have any declarations of interest this evening? No. I don't have any specific announcements this evening, so we'll skip over item number 3 on to minutes of the meeting, 23rd of November 2022. Has everybody had a chance to look at those minutes, and can we agree that they're a true representation this evening? Agreed. Agreed. Wonderful. Thank you. Item 5, we've got public participation. We've got our lovely TACT members in the room. Would you like to speak this evening on the HRA paper at all? So when we come to the item, if you'd like to come forward and sit at the table, then if you wish to contribute, just raise your hand and we'll come to you, or I'll check in with you at the end. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We also have Councillor Wallace who wishes to speak this evening. There we go. I thought I'd spotted you. So I understand you want to speak on items 6, 8 and 9. Did you want to speak on those now or on the items when we get to them? Okay, wonderful. So that moves us swiftly on to item number 6, our Community Safety Partnership Performance Review. The recommendation is that we acknowledge the Community Safety Partnership report, agree any matters of significance to draw to the attention of the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community Housing, or in general for Cabinet. And we have Councillor Wallace who'd like to speak. I shall come to Councillor Wallace if you'd like to speak first, and then come to you, Councillor Ferguson, to introduce the paper. Councillor Wallace, if you'd like to come forwards.
Thank you, Chair. Going forward, it might be easier. I've only got a short question on this one, but going forward, it can be easier if the subject's introduced first. I just had a question about funding on this. The Neighbourhood Services and Community Safety team are clearly doing a valuable work in Winchester City. In my ward in the Meon Valley, we have community support officers who appear to perform a similar role in the Meon Valley villages. As you may be aware, community support officers in the villages are funded by the local community through the parish council precept. So I just had a question about who funds Winchester City's Neighbourhood Services and Community Safety team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. We'll ask Sandra Tuddenham to answer that shortly. Many thanks. So in the room for this item, we've got, as we've already said, Chief Inspector John Turton, we've got Sandra Tuddenham, we've got Gillian Knight, and we've got Campbell Williams as well. So, are you online? I assumed he was online. Apologies. We don't have Campbell Williams in the room and we don't have him online. So Councillor Ferguson, over to you to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce this report to the Scrutiny Committee this evening, as it both highlights the important work of the Community Safety Partnership and the key areas of focus for the last year, which, as the report details, were domestic abuse, quality of life, and high harm crimes. I feel this is actually a very positive report. And while it does show an increase in crime numbers in general, it also makes it clear that this increase is lower for the Winchester district, not only than nationally, but also for Hampshire. It also highlights the progress that is being made, both in terms of intervention and positive outcome. And this is significant progress in certain areas. I know last year the committee spent some time discussing fly tipping and a response to fly tipping. And in section 11.7, we can see there's considerable progress being made there. I think the report also highlights that, particularly in instances where the partnership comes together to work closely, as detailed in section 11.3, where there was a multi-agency response to the upsurge in antisocial behaviour, graffiti and damage to council property last year, that the partnership can be particularly effective. Another example may be where the Winchester City Council antisocial behaviour lead officer and Hampshire Fire Brigade came together to deal with an upsurge in disruption and fire and antisocial behaviour at Twyford Lock in the summer. The committee has possibly noted or will note that the data in the report is only for the first 6 months of the year, April to September, and that's because the third quarter data isn't available yet. And Chair, I know that you said you asked for this paper to be brought forward so we could actually have Chief Inspector John Turton with us for one last time. But it may be something the committee wants to consider, whether or not this report would come later in the cycle so that we'd have more data to consider. I don't really have anything more to add. I don't know whether Sandra Tuddenham or John Turton would like to add anything, but if not, I believe we're going straight into questions. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ferguson, we'll come to Chief Inspector Turton, as we always do every year, to give us a highlights and lowlights summary, if that's okay. And apologies on the funding question, Councillor Wallace, it's Gilly Knight we'll come to on that and not Sandra Tuddenham, so, but we will get that answered. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hopefully by now you've had a good opportunity to read the report. As Councillor Ferguson said, I'm really quite proud of some of the activity in there and the performance. I can't add any more actually than some of the areas that would have covered, you've already covered there, but I'm really happy to take any questions on any issues that you've got, and I think you're the same as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. So having looked through the report, does anybody have any specific questions they'd like to ask of? Oh, you'd like Councillor Wallace's answered first. Gillian, can we come to you for Councillor Wallace's question first?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, the team is partly funded by General Fund and also partly funded by the HRA. So some officers will be funded half by General Fund, half by the HRA, and I think that's across the whole of the team. There isn't anybody that's solely funded, and there is some funding from the Town Forum.
Yeah. Okay, coming to committee questions. Do we have any questions of Chief Inspector John Turton or Sandra Tuddenham this evening? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you, and thank you to John and Sandra for a really informative thank you, and all the work that you do throughout the year, much and varied. In terms of the prison, which sits absolutely in the heart of the city, and those who are released from prison, and obviously those coming into the probation service, are we working as effectively as we can in that relationship, knowing that may not all be in our domain, as it were, and that we are reliant on others providing the services from that side of the equation. But how is that working now? Because we've ebbed and flowed over time with the prison and the probation team, and how they've impacted us here in the district. Thank you.
I'll start that one. I think relationships are really good, actually. The connections are good. I think they could always be better. You know, like many services at the moment, that's clearly a stretch. I think they could do more if they had more. And I do think as well that that the work around some of our persistent offenders and moreover, some of the reasons why they offend as well, some of the mental health and some of the substance dependencies, I think that, you know, we could really drill into that a little bit deeper. And you know, but some of the volume crime that we do on district, some of the lower harm theft, for instance, is one of the things that we see that, you know, it's just a symptom of a need to fund their habits and their dependencies. So, you know, if we can get upstream, we can look at education, if we could look at that preventative stuff, but actually once they we are in that sort of cycle, what more can we do in terms of rehabilitation would be something that I would really want to look at.
I'll just add to that we have a strategic member sitting on the CSP strategic group from the prison, and also we have a triage of John, myself, and the fire service area manager. We liaise with the prison through that group as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cromoison.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chief Inspector and Sandra, for the work you do to try and keep the community safe and keep some of those numbers down lower than they would otherwise be. So got a fairly high level question. And what it boils down to is, within the partnership, do you have a process where you can all sit around the table and sort of go through the, you know, what's going well and what do we think could be better? And from that, what are the three things perhaps you would say we're doing is going really well, and the three things that perhaps you think, you know, could be better? Because those obviously will be signals for things that we should all be looking at going forward. And if you could also comment on the role of the housing associations, because I know our own team do a lot of great work, but you know, we've had mixed experiences with housing associations in the role that they play. So it would be really interesting to hear your perspective of how well housing associations play in that partnership role. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start. Quite a few questions there, actually. It's a bit of a memory test to start off with. But in terms of sitting down together and having that kind of sort of scrum down to understand what's going on in district, you know, what we need to be looking at and how we're going to tackle it. There's a whole host of meetings. One in particular that's really useful is the tactical planning meeting that I chair every month. It's essentially a police meeting, but partners are invited in, and it's always really well represented at that meeting. And so the focus on that meeting is performance. It's driven by performance. So we look at what our crime types are. We look at emerging issues. We look at crime types that are reported in exception, and how we're going to tackle them. Then we look at those that are repeat offenders. We look at those that are vulnerable, just to make sure that we're tackling the offenders, making sure that we're protecting those people that are vulnerable in district. And there's a real collective, so that we all come to that meeting with our own issues. And at the end of that meeting, we set, as well as our district priorities, we set priorities at the end of that meeting. We decide on those vulnerable people that need extra focus, and sometimes work that comes out of that. We also decide on who are the people that are causing the most harm on district, and who we're going to be relentless at tackling. And that's either using the criminal justice system, or more often than not now, it's problem solving. So, you know, it is moved away from just thinking that we can arrest ourselves, you know, out of all these problems, to thinking about what the problems actually are, and bringing in those key professionals and agencies, and taking that out of the meeting. So that's a really good forum that we are collected, but there are many others, and probably too many to mention tonight. So And I think actually, I probably off the bat can't give you 3 of each, but what do we do well? You know, I think we do a really, really good job at responding to crime series. I think we do a really, really good job at dealing with those high-end, high-arm issues, because although we've got a really small increase in our crime rate, it's the lower level crime, and of course we would want it to be decreasing and not increasing. But you know, the latest look at that is it's about 12% up of what it was last year, and the numbers behind that are theft, petty theft. Some of it's theft from motor vehicle, some of it's theft from non-dwellings. So we're not getting those crime series that the organised crime groups are something that we're really decent at tackling. And also I think we work really well together in terms of problem solving. And I'm actually really proud of the work that we've kind of done together, and some of the kind of lasting sort of projects that we've been able to kind of like walk away from, and we've designed, you know, you'll be able to see in the city some of the things that we've done this year that have changed massively, designed all those kind of issues out. But yeah, in terms of, I mean, I've said it before, one thing that I think that we could do better is managing some of the kind of repeat offenders and the reason why they're offending. Not dealing with offences. You know, they can offend quicker sometimes than we can investigate it. It's a matter of fact. But if we can actually understand why they are offending and hit that off at the head, rather than to look at the symptoms, that'd be something that I think we could probably do better.
I'll just answer about the RSLs. So yeah, we do collaborate with them, and that would be through many of the task and finish groups or subgroups that we've got, such as ASB panel and other, where we're working with our street community and whether there's, you know, homelessness involved, etc. But I'd say that Winchester is renowned for its partnership ethos, and that's across other CSPs and other local authorities. So in terms of our community safety partnership, that is the management group, if you like. We call it a strategic group, but they are a multi-agency decision makers who come together and obviously ensure that we're delivering against stat duty, etc.
Thank you both. Thank you. Brilliant.
Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Chair. If I could echo the committee's thanks, Chief Inspector, for your role over the years and the excellent work that you've done, particularly in our ward, Kingsworthy. Recently, we had a spate of sort of teenage troublemakers. And I wanted to ask about, and it was remarkable how effective a visit from a police officer to such homes and how welcome that was by the parents in nipping that particular group of troublemakers in the bud. But do you still send officers into schools? I expect that was all stopped during COVID, wasn't it? Because it always strikes me that this is a very good way of nipping that sort of problem in the bud. And has that resumed, or do you not have the resources for that anymore? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, because not just COVID, but it was something that as we moved into austerity and there were quite severe cuts, we used to have schools liaison officers, and they were one of the first kind of things to go. But now, you know, slowly that sort of stuff is coming back now, and we've got a local policing delivery unit that is the hub for Hampshire, and they look at how we deliver our kind of schools charter. We've got a really good offer that's, you know, it's offer online. It's called Safe for Me. That's got all the tools and stuff that cover a whole host of subjects. So we're increasingly now looking at not putting lots of police officers into school, but we've got a handful of officers trained to a different kind of skill set, and they're encouraged to get into schools because, you know, like I say, some of, you know, the preventative stuff is a lot about education, isn't it? If we can actually get that meaningful education, and we can help to inform people to make those decisions, and prevent them kind of going down the wrong kind of road and entering into lives of vulnerability and crime, then 100% we'd want to do that every time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just echo the views of my fellow councillors on the work you're doing, which is fantastic, and thank you for that. And I also I'm amazed that you can get to retirement keeping your youthful good looks at this stage as well. So well done. My question is on late night economy, particularly within Winchester. I'm just interested in the issues that you see from that late night economy, things that we as a council may be doing that make it more difficult for you, and things that we could possibly do that would make it easier.
Yeah, late night economy is something that's managed really well in Winchester. Actually, we work really closely with Winchester Bid, and the crime reduction manager from Winchester Bid chairs a pub watch. It's really strong. It's really well attended. It links into the CCTV. They're all on the shop watch radio system when during the evening. We've got the street pastors that are out as well, which is a kind of like softer level, lower intervention, which works really well. But in terms of assaults, really low level assaults actually. Sometimes we saw in the past that we look at working with the university and looking at the whole kind of violence against women and girls agenda as well. We've got loads of initiatives and educational stuff that's going on there, but in terms of crime levels from nighttime economy, they're really low. And it's really nice as well. We've got things like the Best Bar None awards, which are those kind of aspirational awards that that a lot of the venues that put the nighttime economy offer on, they aspire to be really good, really safe places to go and visit. Yeah, so the nighttime economy, whilst we would never want to take our eye off that, we'd always want to make sure it's managed well. It is managed well, and it doesn't need to be. You know, if I go back to my earlier policing days, nighttime economy looked like a sea of police officers in yellow jackets just waiting for things to happen. But you know, the licensees are much more responsible now. They monitor the people that are coming into the venues. They monitor the amount of how much they're having to drink, and some of that's difficult as well because that's changed. You know, it's you know, back in the day people would start their evening drinking in towns and cities, but you know, we know now that it's quite expensive. So quite often venues have got problems to deal with when people arrive, when they might have been preloading and drinking before they even gone out for an evening. So it can be even more difficult, but they do a good job.
Councillor Kraska.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sandra and Chief Inspector, for work and the report and for being here today. Great report. I had a hard time at this meeting last year when I particularly focused on a lot of the numbers, which I didn't think were particularly good. But it's great to see a big difference in some of the numbers, particularly I think again the violence and the sexual offences, which it's good to see better numbers, well, very good numbers on that actually. I think you mentioned some of that in your response just now in terms of nighttime economy. But is there anything any more we can do in that space, do you think?
Yeah, there's always more that can be done, and you know, we can always, I think, focusing on the things that we're doing well and just get better at doing it. But in terms of a safe city, one of my responsibilities is to review all crime over the weekend, over 24 hours. We have a daily management meeting every morning, so we don't just rely on waiting to see those crime trends at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. Like every single day, we are looking at what's happened in terms of crimes, in terms of incidents, and in terms of intelligence that's coming in. You know, overridingly, it's a really, of course, there'll be incidents that are regrettable. You know, the violence that we've kind of got at the moment is split into two sort of sections. So we get violence with injury and we get violence without injury. Violence with injury is you know, it's a really a minor part of the sort of crime types. And some of the crime types that are in there are things like protection from harassment and sending letters with intent to cause anxiety and stuff like that. And they some of them have actually moved on from antisocial behaviour crimes. So some of those crime types have changed, but they all add to violence as a whole. So it's important that we understand the detail behind that, and that we don't respond to a problem that we've not got. So dealing with those kind of lower levels until they, making sure that they don't that escalate into any more severe problems. But it's just really ensuring that we've got some of the high-end crime, the violence with injury, the most serious violence, the grievous bodily harms. They're really rare.
I had a question, if I may. The assault and emergency workers hasn't changed much from the 21 to 22. And I just wondered, because that's received such focus recently, whether there's any specific moves to how to reduce that further, because of course attacking them at their most, when they're out helping people, could cost lives, even if not theirs.
Yeah, we report all incidents, so we've got a good, clear view of what that looks like. And in terms of what we can do to reduce it, I mean, it's a contact sport, so sometimes we're going to get injured in doing stuff. We've got good training, we've got good equipment, but the reality is that we deal with some really violent, volatile situations sometimes, and sadly, it's inevitable that we're going to get injured. What we do post incident is we always have a debrief. We always kind of consider what's happened, if we could have done anything different, if we could do anything better, or what the learnings in that. And then quite often that's filtered back into our personal safety training. So if we find out that there are common themes of injuries, if it's a control and restraint problem, if it's maybe stopping vehicles, or a whole number of different issues, they'll try then to weave that into the training, so that kind of learning can be passed on and hopefully prevent it.
Does that count the same also for your ambulance crews out there and things who are being attacked?
Yeah, it will do. I mean, they'll be responsible for their own training, but absolutely. And we've got a response called Operation Cavell at the moment as well, which is not so much preventative, but it's about capturing the best evidence when assaults do happen, so that we treat them with the, instead of it being like a secondary assault, we treat them as serious as it would be a member of the public. So make sure we capture it as best evidence, and we look to get the best outcome.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I should declare an interest, as my husband is a board member at Trinity, but have you noticed a difference since the new accommodation came on board at Trinity, housing the slightly more chaotic, who perhaps previously would have been elsewhere on the streets? Has that helped, or have you noticed a difference? Thank you.
I think what we have noticed is there's greater support. So if any of those residents are in the high street and there are issues, then we can call on Trinity staff who will come out and do some outreach work, or persuade that individual that perhaps they need to go back home for an hour or so. So I would say, although the numbers don't necessarily look like they've decreased, the collaboration that we've got with Trinity is far greater in terms of that engagement with our street community.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for them at all? Do we have any debate anybody would like to speak about? No? Oh, Councillor Krask.
I didn't mention it before, but I did just want to thank John for all his hard work. Particularly want to thank him for the work he's done in the town and the town forum. You've come along to the town oftentimes. And I think a large part of what you've done, which has been very helpful, is to help us understand what's going on with people and why they do the things that they do. And it's not always a case of taking police action. There's more sensitivity that's needed with people, and understanding as well, which I think you brought to your role. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the social media piece here because I'm aware that very often things are shared. Can you help us locate this person? And quite often you get sarcastic comments, and you got one of the people you were looking for comment in his own post saying, "Can you leave me alone?" About 2 weeks ago. But I just want to thank you as well for that social media piece, because whilst you do get the sarcastic and not so witty comments, it really does show and highlight that you're always out there and that you do appreciate the support and that you're doing everything you can. Case closed, and I think that that's a real positive step. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, when you read a report such as the one before us this evening, you realise the extent of the work that the team is doing, how many plates you are actually spinning, how many interventions, how many groups you're interacting with, that broad partnership approach that we have here in the city, which I think and in the district really does help us. And when you give us the data, that's helpful, but you get a very clear picture of your desire to educate, to deal sensitively where we can, to try and build on all of those relationships that we have. And I think this report really endorses that and helps us to understand that we are in a good space. As you said, there's always more that we can do, but that we are in the right direction. So thank you to everyone for the contribution this evening to this really helpful report. Thank you.
Thank you. And to Chief Inspector John Turton, we will sadly miss you. You have been an absolute star coming along to speak to us annually and supporting us within our communities. And I know that everyone I speak to, from the PCSOs to the police officers, they speak of you with really high regards. You will be sadly missed by us and everybody else. So I'd like to record our best thanks on behalf of the Scrutiny Committee for everything you've done to support us and the area, and thank you for coming along this evening, and we had to have you here.
Thanks very much. It sounds like it's been all about me tonight, really. It's been a bit embarrassing hearing my name so many times, but I've been at Winchester now for about 10 years. I came here as district inspector and more latterly district commander, and to be honest, it's been a real privilege to work in such a great city, one that I live in as well. But it's not just about me, it's about the partnership, and it's about the people that I live with. I love my team. I've got some outstanding police officers, but it's broader than that. It's just the relationship that Sandra and I started off all that time ago. You know, we've got some stuff that we've really sorted out in the city. We've got some long-lasting stuff to be proud of. So, yeah, not just about me, but I just wanted to, on record, say the partnership and the members and the support that I've had from all you as well. Thanks very much, and good luck to you all.
Thank you. Do we know who's replacing you yet? Who will have this year? Not yet. Okay. We'll await to hear that with bated breath. Okay, to close off this item, so we had the committee acknowledge community safety partnership progress report and agree any matters of significance draw to the attention. I haven't recorded any specific matters to draw to the attention of Deputy Leader and Cabinet. So is everybody happy that we move on to the next item? Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to the housing revenue account budget 23-24. In the room this evening, we have our two new directors. So I'd like to introduce Simon Hendy down there, and we have Sharon Evans up here. So I'd just like to welcome the two strategic directors to the room and to their first scrutiny meeting. So coming on to the HRA, the recommendation is that the Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposals of Ref Cab 3387, which is to be considered by Cabinet's meeting on the 9th of February. Tact, would you like to come forward to the table in case there's anything particular you'd like to say? Councillor Ferguson will introduce this item. So Over to you, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to be able to introduce the HRA budget paper this evening. It sets out both a viable and sustainable budget, and that's despite considerable inflationary and cost pressures. A budget that will allow the council to continue to invest in our existing housing stock, to make it safer, warmer, more energy efficient, and healthier for our residents. This includes investment to help energy consumption, carbon, and perhaps most importantly for our tenants in the cost of living crisis, energy bills. It also will allow us to continue to provide the high quality tenant services that our tenants rightfully expect. It also will allow us to continue to build and provide the new social homes that we know are needed right across the district, enabling us to make continued good progress towards that ambitious target of providing 1,000 additional homes over 10 years. The budget also provides for a revenue investment of 400,000 in HRA services. These include funding additional fire and building safety compliance measures, making our homes safer, bringing forward the Retrofit Ready programme, which tenants have clearly told that they would like to see implemented quickly, making homes warmer, more energy efficient and reducing tenants' energy bills. It will also allow us to make that additional investment in preventative rather than reactive programme of measures to address issues relating to condensation, damp and mould, making our tenants' homes healthier. Given the significant inflationary and cost pressures that the budget is under and the need to invest in the growth options I've just outlined, as well as understanding tenants' real concerns about their own household budgets, considerable thought and deliberation has gone into setting the rent proposal for this year, including detailed discussions with TACT on 3 separate occasions to fully understand their concerns and their views. The report proposes a 7% increase in rent, which is in line with the government's rent increase cap. This will ensure that the HRA budget remains sustainable and viable over the 30-year period. The rent increase is in line with neighbouring local authorities and registered providers in the area and takes housing-related benefits, takes into account the fact that 60% of tenants are in receipt of housing-related benefits, which the government confirmed in the autumn would be going up by 10.1%. It is also worth noting that although a cap has not been imposed by the government, in light of the cost of living crisis and the significant financial pressures we know tenants are under, we are also restricting the rent increase to 7% for our shared ownership properties. This would otherwise have been 13.1% next year. In addition, service charges are being capped at 7% as well. We've also maintained a welfare fund of 215,000 within the HRA budget to act as a safety net for those tenants who are facing particular hardship and need exceptional additional support. Chair, you obviously have already said we have Gillian Knight, Dick Johnson and also Simon Hendy in the room to help answer questions. I didn't know whether Gilly or Dick, you wanted to add anything or whether I've said it all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So committee, looking at the main report, does anybody have any questions on the first part from page 49 to 62 before we get to the background and proposed plan? Councillor Cromoyson.
Really just going to go off the recommendations here. So, excuse me. I understand the team and the cabinet member have agonised over, just where to put the number in terms of the increase and looked at various options, and have settled on the 7% cap. And I guess the risk that is being, the concern there is whether that will push people into hardship. So I'm wondering, what there's two things really. There's this other fund which is for vulnerable tenants. So I'm wondering, have we got any estimates for how many may well be needing to tap into that because of the increase? And just very, very in simple terms, what are the criteria to apply for that extra, those welfare support budget contributions?
Thank you. As Councillor Ferguson said, we know that 60% of our tenants are in receipt of benefits, means tested benefits or retirement pension, and we have technology within our income team to be able to target those tenants that we know will be struggling. We can see the difference in the way in which they are conducting their rent account. So we may see, you know, a pattern of unusual arrears, etc. So we have a very different approach within our income team where we're, as I say, rather than contacting everybody, we're targeting those that we think are in problems. As you say, we have the Welfare and Assist Fund, and that's there to assist in many ways. It may not be directly in respect of their rent account, but it could be helping them with other expenses. So it's a very flexible, personalised budget. So it could be helping somebody have get a taxi licence to continue to work. It could be helping people with school uniform purchases, etc. So we work really hard to target those tenants that are in difficulties. I don't know if Amber has anything else to add around the welfare fund. She manages that budget, but it is, you know, I think the benefit of it is that it is flexible and reactive and helps those in difficulties. We also have obviously grants from the government and from the DWP to help with people that are getting into arrears. We have discretionary housing benefit payments if people are in receipt of means tested benefits. So there's a lot of support out there for people, but we do appreciate that those on low income are going to struggle over the next year.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking over at the TAP member here to see if that all
Sure.
resonates and makes sense from your perspective. So thank you.
Councillor Fergus. Oh, did you want to come in there?
No, I just say, yeah, we have had meetings and we have been told about the welfare fund and things that would go, or whatever they call it, and that it will and what they do to try and help people. Yeah.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. You can imagine, Councillor Cromoyson, that this is something that I really think about very, very closely. I am concerned about residents. I know the cost of living crisis is very real for many of our tenants, particularly. The Welfare Fund, when it was originally set up, was just for 2 years. What we're doing in this budget is putting that in the base budget. So that Welfare Fund will be there year on year for tenants who are most in need. We originally put 250,000 in. We didn't spend that amount of money. There wasn't that call on resources. So we think this is a good amount to cover what people need. There is actually a tenants newsletter that goes out every month. So as well as pushing out the information about that extra support through TACT, it's also something that we can add to the tenants newsletter. So they're really aware of what support is out there. But it is something that's discussed regularly. And I think tenants feel very clearly that the council does care, and that active monitoring of trying to see when tenants may be getting into difficulty. And Mrs. Knight didn't mention it, but we've just recently invested in some new software, which will help us in this endeavour too. So it's, again, being proactive to support tenants. And it's also very much around one of our key priorities, which is that 10-year sustainment, because we all know it starts with a safe and secure home. So ensuring that our tenants can continue to have a safe and secure home is a priority for us.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on that first part? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I think some of them may spill over into later parts, but tell me if I need to hold those until later. I think there's a typo on recommendation 12. The recommendation for the Ukrainian homes, I think, is detailed in 19.5, not 19.4. which I think is an important additional opportunity to help that community that we've been offered, and helpful to see that articulated in the budget. In terms of the early part of the report as well, we've just heard about the sort of the difference between 6 and 7, and although a 6% increase does make the budget viable, 7 is more robust. What I think it would be really helpful, and I think this has been mentioned before, that the areas for opportunity in 13 that you illustrated, if there could be more of a sort of a shopping list, as it were, what are we getting for our money? So if we're paying the extra 1% as tenants, that everyone can then really identify what those added value pieces are, or if the reality is we've just got to spend more on what we ordinarily would be doing, at least we all understand that and we can manage expectations for everyone. And I think some further clarity around that would be really helpful for all as we go through the approval process for this budget. The other thing that I think we heard, and you've just mentioned it, is the welfare fund, which I think is hugely valued. And I think we've heard the tenants say to us that we really need to shout about that and make that accessible. Our comms piece has probably not been as loud and proud as we should have been, and that we should try and make sure that that message is really clearly understood. And if that means a greater level of communication somehow, I think that's what everyone is asking for, because obviously the TACT group understand that, but we need the broader audience to understand that. So that would be helpful. So just a couple of points of refinement on how we're seeing the data here today. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something. We do show in the report that a 7% increase will raise, and Mr. Johnson may make sure I'm correct on this, just about 1.7 million. Of that, 1.449 million will be taken away simply by the inflationary cost pressures, leaving very little headroom to do anything else. And the growth options that we identify for the 400,000, which are detailed in section 13, very much speak to what room we have and what additional money we have to spend. So most of the rent increase is simply being wiped out by covering the inflationary cost pressures. I also think that those are predicated on an assumption that next year inflation will be 5.48%. Now that's based on current projections. If current projections are wrong, then we could see the headroom, that slight headroom that we're leaving, reduced even further. So we have tried to set out what that money, that growth option money, will pay for, but we have to absolutely accept that the volume of that rent increase will simply be wiped out by inflationary cost pressures. Thank you. I don't know whether Mrs. Knight wanted to add anything.
No, I was going to say, a similar response as that, and to say, it is unprecedented time. We have made quite a lot of assumptions around inflationary costs and contractors' increased costs. So it is being, prudent to issue a 7% rent increase. And just to really add that other stockholding authorities within Hampshire have also introduced a 7% rent increase for very similar reasons.
Thank you. So Councillor Horrell's taken us into the second part of the report. So coming on to the background and proposed plan, pages 63 to 71. Do we have any questions on that part? Councillor Cutler.
Problem here. Thank you, Chair. Under item 12.5 on page 64, talk about the cost of retrofit fitting the second bullet point. There's reference to an assumption that government funding will provide external retrofit grant funding to enable the works. What sort of level are you expecting, and how sure can you be that we will get that additional government funding?
Councillor Cutler, this harks back to a paper, Warm Homes, from 2021 by Andrew Kingston, that identified a way forward in terms of looking at investment in retrofit, and it identified that there was this potential cost. I think now it's increased further. The problem is, I think that the HRA business plan doesn't allow for this level of investment. You couldn't put an extra 150 million into the HRA business plan and make it work. So it does very much rely on some way forward being identified. We put 15.7 million into a budget to look at different ways of doing installation, etc. First. But you're right, I mean, that there is an issue ongoing around this if we don't get government funding.
So at the moment, there's no sort of recognised figure of the assumption that there will be extra.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. There is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which the government has announced in different guises on several occasions. We have actually made a bid, Councillor Cutler, for a share of that Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Unfortunately, given the criteria and changing criteria, the amount we could bid for was just over £1 million, but we will bid for any opportunities of government funding in this area. Of that, we have to pay for half of it. So we bid for £1 million, but we have to match funds. So hopefully we'll get 500,000. We will hear whether we've been successful in that bid shortly. So we're hoping for a good outcome. The only other thing to say, and again, Mr. Hendy might want to add something, because this was an area that he highlighted in the report, having only joined us last week. In the actual budget, there is quite a substantial sum that is for major improvements, and one of the most major improvements we're looking at is what we do around heating. So we are currently beginning to have discussions with tenants about what the options might be going forward to take their views on course. And of course, if we're suddenly removing a substantial number of gas boilers, then some of that budget where we're actually replacing them with more energy efficient, more carbon, heating systems that are less carbon intensive, then you could see that there may be some money that isn't allocated to retrofit, but that's actually serving a retrofit purpose. But I don't know whether, Mr. Hendy, you wanted to add anything?
Chair, happy to come in. It is my second week in, but just to give you some comfort, I've come from Wiltshire, and exactly the same discussions were taking place there in relation to the rent increase and whether 7% should be included to deal with the issues that have already been mentioned around protecting the HRA to inflationary cost pressures. I think the report makes the case that building cost inflation is racing far ahead of the normal CPI rates there, and so that would protect the HRA. The point Councillor Ferguson made around looking at the major repairs provisions and what could be done perhaps to address some of the issues there is not only in terms of what provision there could be to address some of the heating, but also at the moment the HRA will incur significant amount of expenditure around compliance and maintenance, for example, of gas boilers on a regular basis. So if in the future there are moved to different types of heating systems in people's homes, then that annual cost would be saved. That could be recycled back into the HRA. But as Councillor Cutler has pointed out, there is an issue here in looking at the HRA and how we can flex and look at how we can make the best use of the resources in the housing revenue account to deal with the retrofit work that needs to happen over the next 30 years.
Thank you. We have any other questions on the second part? Councillor Godfrey.
This is partly about a new build programme. How confident do you feel about the
delivery of the new homes build programme within this current forecast budget, if these homes are to be delivered by a arm's length housing company.
Thank you. The new home, we're not expecting to deliver the new homes through the housing company that's being currently set up. We're looking at that as an alternative offer, and we're trying to fill a gap that's unmet at the moment for young people to try and remain, keep talent in the city by offering an alternative private rented sector offer. And so that will start slowly, and with the 41 units from Winnell being leased to the housing company from the HRA under assured short hold tenancies at market rents. So it's really trying to compete and provide some offer which is more ethical, I suppose, a landlord offer for young people to rent within the property, because there are so many now that cannot afford to privately rent or purchase properties, and perhaps the housing regia isn't something that they wish to pursue, if I've understood your question correctly.
Thank you. I'm clearly misunderstood the risk and assumed it was the housing company was to support the new build programme. Grateful for your clarification and reassured that we're not heading down a very unpleasant path.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Godfrey, at the Cabinet Housing Committee last week, we had a presentation from Andrew Palmer on the New Homes Programme, and currently in the pipeline we have 580 of the 1,000 homes that we want to build over the next years. Some are in that viability assessment. That programme is on track to deliver what we're hoping to deliver through the HRA in the normal way.
Do we have any other questions on that second section of the report? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, we had some debate at Cabinet Housing about 14.6 and the breakdown, and there was some sort of I note here it says approximately. Are we able to get a little better clarity, please, on exactly how our tenants fall in terms of those who are clearly covered by housing benefit, universal credit, those who might just about be managing because they're working, and you're indicating here that 30% are in receipt of pension. Are those, and as I say, there was some debate about whether those were the latest numbers. Are these clarified since that meeting, or is there further understanding of exactly what our tenant audience, how it's made up, particularly as we want to make sure that none of them fall into any difficulty as a consequence of the increased rent? Thank you.
Councillor Horrell, this it says approximately, but essentially we've used data from the last month's rent debit information to analyse people that are on housing benefit, and we've got information from colleagues in the rent team about the numbers on universal credit. So although it's approximate, it's in that ballpark of 60%. It might be fine, but it's around about then.
Thank you.
Okay, coming on to the last section regarding the Housing Services Capital Programme. Oh, Councillor Ferguson, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I actually just wanted to point out a correction that I've spotted on this report. Although I've read this report many, many times, it's always fascinating that you spot something when you come to the table. In 13.2, where it talks about the Retrofit Ready programme, it refers in the 3 lines from the bottom to 1,400 tenants in properties with EPC rating of B and D. That should say E and D. If they were in ratings of B, we'd be very happy. So just if we could amend that, please. Thank you. I didn't want us to go on and I'd forget to say it. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, that should say E and D. Okay, thank you. So coming on to the last section of the main report, The Housing Services Capital Programme, New Build Capital Programme, pages 72 to 75. Do we have any specific questions on that part? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, we heard some very exciting news last week about possible solutions for nitrates and phosphates, and particularly as that will open the door for some of our own properties that we've been waiting to build and have been unable to do so. I suppose the question is, given the importance of this in unlocking that and potentially providing credits for other programmes that we may have as a council, are we comfortable, I know the budget's tight, that we have the appropriate budget set aside to allow that piece of work to flow through? Because it would be terrible to know that we could achieve that, but we don't have sufficient resources to make that happen. I appreciate we are working in partnership with others and need others to sign off, but nonetheless, we have some very good initiatives there. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, and thank you, Councillor Horrell. Again, we did have a presentation on this at Cabinet Housing. I think Mr. Johnson is confident that the budget we've set aside specifically for this one is the right budget. I think it's worth for the committee to know on this resolving the micronutrient issue. This is work that we've underway, exploratory works. So we're hoping to get a resolution on whether or not this scheme that we're proposing is acceptable to Natural England Environment Agency in March. Really good news. But at the moment and it is something we're actively being consultation, actually in cooperation also with Push the Partnership.
Thank you. Any other questions on the main body of the report? No, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I don't think we should just jump over the opportunity we've been given to part fund the new homes for the Ukrainian displaced families who are here. The government have committed funds and we have indicated we will be prepared to. But importantly, that as the report says, that the properties become ours for general use once they're no longer required by the Ukrainians. Is there a time limit over which period that would need to happen before they became our general stock? I'm not quite clear when the cutoff is between the use from the Ukrainian families and when they might pass to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. But if the Chief Exec wants to assist if I get this slightly wrong, our understanding is that these homes will be initially for our Ukrainian guests who are at risk of homelessness. That's the key thing. At the moment, our Ukrainian guests have 3 years right to remain. Obviously, we don't know whether the government will extend that period or whether indeed, we just don't know what's going to happen with the war. But at the moment, it's a 3-year right to remain. So you could envisage that those families could have those homes, and when their right to remain ends, they would come back into the HRA. But we don't actually know that for sure. I don't know whether Mr. Haley wanted to add anything else. Sorry, Simon Henge. I didn't realise you were pointing to Simon. It's a game of chess. Simon.
Chair, that's broadly right. I mean, the properties will be in the HRA. We have to provide the accommodation for the 16 properties for Ukrainian families, 1 for Afghan families in bridging hotels at the moment. So as long as those families have leave to remain, they will carry on living those properties. If they don't have leave to remain, then we don't know what would happen after that, whether we will be required to provide the accommodation for any other dedicated groups. But at the moment, the way the scheme seems to be working, will be available as general needs accommodation for any other.
Many thanks. Okay, moving on to Appendix 1. Does anybody Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on the first page of Appendix 1 at the bottom section, rents and other income. Just for clarity as to why in the original budget we didn't have any income from investment properties, and the adjustment brought it up to 176,000, whereas the line below it, the rents and other income, went the other way, and I presume it's a sort of reallocation, but the figures don't quite add up even with a reallocation. So I wonder if we could have an explanation of those figures.
Yes, Councillor Cutler. So essentially, we should have been accounting for investment properties separately within the HRA for some time. They've been recognised in the final accounts for a period of time, and the adjustment took place last year. So just the kind of investment properties we're looking at are properties that are shops that are providing a commercial service, such as Stanmore Fish and Chip Shop, One Stop Shop, Golden Phoenix. So they've been identified as being commercial and should have been categorised as investment. They were held as other properties and they've been moved. At the same time, we've taken the opportunity to revise down some of the income because essentially some of them are void and aren't going to be let. So essentially that's why it doesn't quite balance.
Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask about the garage rents? They don't look as if they're going up at all. Is that intentional? What's the usual way of increasing the rents for garages? And I know that a lot of garages are potential building sites because they're not actually used for what they're supposed to be used for. Is increasing the rents slightly above the normal housing rent increase, say, a good way of discouraging people from?
So we actually do have a fees and charges report, and in that garage rents are going up by 5%, but the majority of garages which were managed by the HRA and owned by the HRA are now in the general fund as investment properties for the general fund. So we've got roughly a retained proportion of 10 to 14% of garages, which are quite hard to let. And I believe that we're taking a report later this year on reviewing the lettings policy for garages. Had we applied inflation in this instance, it would have been about £3,000. But essentially we've got quite a high level of void, so we've taken the opportunity just to adjust that and just not to put that in at this point in time.
Thank you. Any other questions on Appendix 1? Councillor Horrell.
Could Mr. Johnson please just explain how we've had the movement on the housing management special homelessness line between the revised budget 22-23 and 23-24 budget?
I'm not able to answer that one at this point in time, but I will get back to you, Councillor Coral.
Thank you. Any more on Appendix 1? Okay, Appendix 2. Do we have any questions on Appendix 2? No. Appendix 3. Appendix 4, the new build capital programme. And Appendix 5. Appendix 6. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, we obviously still continue to receive right to buy receipts, and I know historically we've had to use those monies in a particular way against a particular timetable if we wanted to reinvest it in stock. And I know in the past we've perhaps been out of sync slightly towards some of those with those constraints. Are we in good shape for the latest forecast for the use of those monies? Thank you.
Councillor Horrell, yes. The rules around right to buy receipts have changed. They've been simplified. They allow us now to apply, instead of 30%, 40% of our capital receipts against not only affordable housing, but shared ownership housing as well. At the moment, we also have, they've extended the time frame for using those receipts from 3 years to 5 years. So we have no real issues at the moment about using those receipts in the next few years.
Thank you. Any other questions on Appendix 6? No. Do we have any debate on this paper? No. Councillor Horrell.
Don't think you'd expect an HRA paper without me saying something. Councillor Ferguson is smiling there. But firstly, thank you to the team for their efforts of putting all of this together. And thank you for the opportunities that have been given to TACT for the conversations that we've had about some of these elements. I think we may all be slightly nervous about some of it, but that doesn't mean to say we haven't had the opportunity for discussion. So I think that's been appreciated by the TACT team, and it was a lively and open discussion about some of the ups and downs of that. I do think the key number is to understand what the 7% gives us, but the inflationary elements takes a very significant number away from that. But then the balance, exactly what the balance is going to be used for, I still don't personally have enough clarity in 13 just to see exactly sort of penny for penny where that's going. However, I do think it's incumbent upon all of us to really work hard to make sure that we continue to deliver the outstanding homes and communities that we do, but also to deliver on our new build programme, because we still know many people don't have somewhere to live and don't have somewhere to call home, and we need to keep at that programme. So making sure the HRA in the long term is robust, of course, is a key responsibility that we all have. So thank you for the team, and look forward to further discussion over the coming meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Did you have any further comments?
Just to say that it looks so the extra 1% will probably be eaten up by some inflation, but we had meetings and a lively discussion, and most of the TAP members did go for the 7%, I think. So, but with caveats, like, you know, but and we're also pleased to see that the shared ownership will only go up to the same amount, and so they won't, for the just managing, will be able to survive a bit better, perhaps. And that's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for your additional comments, much appreciated. Councillor Cutler.
Yeah, I'd just like to support the paper broadly. I mean, I think in a time with the cost of living crisis, it's very, very difficult to be talking about large rent increases, but the clarity that the paper shows on that, that the fact that we have the welfare fund is crucial for those people that fall through the net in that process. I think that's very good. I'm surprised that Councillor Horrell asked for a penny for penny account of the surplus, when any surplus is entirely based around a figure that is a guesstimate in the first place. So you can't really have a penny for penny if you don't exactly know what the inflation rate is going to be. I think there's enough of an indication of where that is in the paper to be reassuring, given that it's a very inexact science to actually guess where we will be in terms of inflation in the future. So I'd like to commend the paper. I think one key point is the comparison of weekly rents as a proportion of market rent table on 14.11, and that really shows how the actual average rents are well below the social rent figure, and that is caused by rent caps over the years, as one of the main reasons, and one of the aspects that makes it quite difficult to run the HRA longer term. So I think the team's done a great job, given that those figures are suppressed by rent caps over the years.
Councillor Krask.
Thanks. I think likewise, similar support for the paper in a very difficult situation. It can't have been easy to pull this paper together, and the conversations and discussions with TACT. I think everybody understands the inflationary situation we're in. We wish it were different, all of us, but it's not. But we're doing what this paper does its best to deal with the reality that we've got. I think I'm concerned about the future. Hopefully inflation will go down. Interested in the service charges and how this paper looks to cap that at 7%. But in the future, the need to consider how we address that going forward, and going back to full cost recovery rather than absorbing the difference, which inflation doesn't decrease, then could be quite a big number. So I think that's a risk to be considered going forward as well. So thank you.
Thank you. So our recommendation this evening was, as I read at the start, that we comment on the paper. Mrs. Taylor's going to read out some amendments and points that we made throughout.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, if helpful for the committee. First of all, committee, you noted that there are 2 amendments to the paper. Firstly, in paragraph 13.2, it should read E and D. And secondly, in the recommendation 12, it should reference paragraph 19.5. Secondly, through you, Chair, I believe the committee supported the Cabinet member's proposal to maximise communications in newsletters to ensure tenants are aware of the support available. And then there were a number of points which were raised by members of the committee, points of clarity, which were answered tonight. And they included clarity sought on the delivery of the New Homes programme. Secondly, on the funding and capacity for nutrient mitigation and delivery of homes. Thirdly, of the grant conditions for the provision of properties under the Local Authority Housing Fund. And on the fees and charges in respect of garages. And there was one item the team were not able to answer this evening, but we will get a written answer to all members of the committee and onward to Cabinet for the purposes of the decision making next week, which was that clarity was sought on the movement in the homeless budget year on year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. So with all those noted, are we happy that we've given this one a good airing? Wonderful. Thank you very much to the team. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Much appreciated. Thank you both for coming this evening. Thank you to our TAC members for attending as always. Thank you. Moving on to our next item, we're moving on to item 10 instead of item 8 because we have with us this evening Andrew Bootflower from Hampshire County Council. So we are moving on to item 10, the Treasury Management paper next. It's recommended that the Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposals within the report CAB 3390, which will again be considered at Cabinet's meeting on the 9th of February. We have in the room Liz Keys, Neil Aitken and Andrew Boutflower to assist us. And Councillor Power, I believe you wish to introduce.
I do. Thank you, Chairman. This report sets out the Council's capital spending programme and the principles which underpin this. Sorry, are we on item?
Item 10, please, Treasury Management. We're doing
Treasury Management. I'm sorry.
Page 182 of our report packs.
I do beg your pardon. It's a requirement of the SIPFA Treasury Management Code that all councils have to approve a Treasury Management strategy. The strategy set out in this report has been produced with input from Hampshire County Council Investments and Borrowing Team, who manage the cash balances, investments of surplus cash, and sourcing of short-term borrowing, and Arling Close, the Council's Treasury advisors. We set out the forecast borrowing need based on the capital investment strategy and the general fund and HRA budgets, the borrowing strategy, the investment strategy, and the Treasury Management and Prudential indicators. There are two key changes in this report. There is an increase in the limit of investments beyond 1 year from 20 million to 25 million to give the council more flexibility to invest longer term and achieve higher yields when cash balances allow. In addition, community municipal bonds have been included as a potential source of borrowing. These are crowdfunding bonds with the lenders being residents and the general public. Bowflower and from Hampshire County Council Investments and Borrowing Team is with us this evening, as are officers from the finance team, and we look forward to questions, Chairman.
Many thanks. Okay, so coming to the main body of the report, pages 182 to 189. Does anybody have any questions on that first part of the report down to the end of the risk section? No. Any questions from 190 to 209, the whole rest of that report? Councillor Godfrey.
Slightly concerned about some of the cautious words around the pooled property fund. Is our investment, which has always done us very proud for many years, is our choice to invest in this pooled property fund under threat because of a change in guidance and regulation?
I don't think it's under threat. In my opinion, you know, as you understand, we're invested for the long term because that's the nature of the fund. The difficulty if they change the rules around how we have to account for it is that if there's a gain or a loss, we would have to reflect that in the general fund. I think what we would have to do in that scenario is set up another reserve so that we put the gains and losses in that reserve so that members, because we won't actually have realised those the capital gains or losses, there's not real money, there's not real extra money to spend unless we sold the fund. So by putting it in a reserve that we said we couldn't spend, I think that's a way we could manage it without threatening holding on to the investment itself. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Andrew.
I think the only thing I'd add to the councillor's question is just to say that from an investment point of view, we still remain satisfied and reassured that we're comfortable with it as part of the portfolio. I think just there's an additional accounting challenge now that comes with that, as Neil's outlined.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on that segment of the report? Councillor Cromoyson.
Thank you, Chair. I approach this with some trepidation in that I'm not an expert at all on treasury management and policy and all that sort of thing. So I actually found it quite hard to figure out really kind of what is my role here in scrutinising this. And I guess it's to be a layperson that's representing our constituents, if you like. So for me, it's like I'm trying to understand. You know, in my simple understanding, it's all about risk and managing reward and trying to find the right balance given the demands on the funds. So is there a way in which you can explain in high level to a layperson what the factors are that are guiding your decisions in how you manage these various pots of money? And I'm sure that's probably a 3-hour lecture probably, but if you can just distill that down into a really short, brief explanation.
Yeah, Chair, that's okay. Yeah, so I can try and do 3 hours in 3 points really, which is the 3 points that CITFA give us in terms of how we look at investments, and those are security, liquidity, and yield, and importantly in that order. So first and foremost, any investment we make on your behalf, we want to make sure that all of those funds come back in the entire amount exactly when they're supposed to. Secondly, we want to make sure that you've got the cash in your bank account when you need it to pay the obligations you've got in terms of paying staff, paying suppliers and anything else. And then thirdly, and only thirdly, is then we're trying to maximise the return that we can make for you with the range of investments that we set out. Strategy. So that's that's the high level kind of the framework that we operate in. But it's a great question to start with.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on this second half of the paper? No? Okay, going to the appendices then. Appendix A, do we have any questions on Appendix A? Appendix B? And Appendix C? No? Do we have any further questions at all on this paper? Okay, any debate? No? Oh, Councillor Cutler.
Sorry to disappoint you, Chair, but I'd just like to thank our advisors. As always, the Treasury Management Paper is always something that the vast majority of councillors don't really want to look at too closely. I get the impression frequently, but I've over the years had to, and so I think the Treasury team does a very good job and balances those. And I think that explanation just now was perfectly succinct, and I think is what we really need to know when it comes down to it. And I'd commend to all councillors actually attending the Arling Close briefing every year, because that is a good way of understanding the position we're in. Very useful briefing that we're all invited to in November usually, I think. So, bring that up as part of it, but otherwise I'm very happy with it.
Very useful, thank you for that. Any further debate? No. Did you make any specific points, Dana, on this?
I didn't actually chair on this one, other than the committee sought clarification on the key principles of the investment strategy.
Thank you very much. In that case, the recommendation was to have comments on the proposals within the attached report, and we have commented and we have asked a few questions. And I'd like to thank you for coming along. How do I pronounce your surname? Bowflower. Thank you. So apologies, I called you two different variations at the start. Thank you for coming along for us this evening. Thank you. No, I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you. We've been going an hour and a half, and I'm aware that we've got two relatively heavy papers coming up. So can I recommend that we have a 7-minute comfort break, which brings us back in the room at 8:05, ready to commence. Thank you. Everybody, so we're now moving on to item 8, which is now item 9, but it's still item 8. The General Fund Budget 2023-24. So it's recommended that the Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposals in the attached Cabinet report, CAB 3388, to be considered on the 9th of February. Councillor Wallace, as you've previously expressed, you'd prefer the introduction first. I shall come to Councillor Power for you to introduce and then call Councillor Wallace up for his question.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the financial plan to deliver the council plan, which we approved at council last month. Way back in November, this committee reviewed the budget options proposals and made very few comments at that time. Since then, we've received a one-year settlement agreement, which has pushed back the local government financing review and reset of business rates for a further year. Whilst this means we cannot plan as effectively as we would wish, it has meant a more positive 23-24 settlement than we were anticipating, with a further year of new home bonus at previous levels and indications, no promises, that this will continue for an additional year, 24-25. This has meant a net one-off contribution, a benefit to the council of 2 million, which is useful. The report before you today confirms those proposals and areas of budget growth included in the November options report carried forward to the proposed budget. It also details some cuts that were proposed in November that we are not now intending to implement. However, the main change is the creation of reserves to support the investment in areas of yet uncertain budgets. There was no point in investigating those matters for spending if we weren't going to have the money to deliver it. The Greener Faster reserve, that's £250,000, will support the council's ambitions to become carbon neutral, enabling us to expand renewable energy, explore the use of carbon assets for carbon and nutrient offsetting, reduce energy demand in council-owned buildings, and lower the carbon footprint of council-owned tractor vehicles, and enhance active travel provisions. I think we're all aware that there are funding pots that crop up, but this reserve will allow us to find out exactly what would cost how much, so that we have a ready plan to apply for any grants that may come trotting along. The 500,000 for the future of waste and other changes to its food recycling and other recycling collections will be introduced in early 25. Now, there is going to be new burdens funding from government, but we don't know how much that's going to be. And we expect it to need supplementing if we are going to follow the corporate strategy and require low carbon vehicles or zero carbon producing vehicles. And the reserve will support the transition to these new services. Pride in Place will support the toilet strategy, working with parish councils to ensure Winchester is providing safe, clean, appropriate, maintained and accessible public conveniences, and enable the public convenience upgrade programme to modern standards. There will also be a higher level investment in work to reduce antisocial behaviour, vandalism and fly tipping. This is in addition to extending the one-off budget funding street scene works under the Pride of Place priority by 50,000 per annum. The 400,000 for digital transformation, we hope to make the services as easy as possible for customers to access. And this reserve will support that digital transformation, including a review of the council's website and your Winchester app, which will allow customers to both report issues, check information and self-serve 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Cost of living and living well reserve will extend the existing exceptional hardship fund that benefits those council taxpayers most in need of financial assistance, and continue the council's commitment to the principles of the City of Sanctuary, supporting those who arrive from peril, and further support the cost of living initiatives, for example, through advice services and the business support programme. It is important to highlight that we are still forecasting deficits in future years. Our medium-term financial strategy includes plans to complete a detailed and thorough strategic budget review to identify how we address longer-term deficits. This will include reviewing all operating costs, ongoing asset challenges to make sure we are using assets effectively, and assessment of opportunities to generate income from our services. Some work has started on this, and other projects are being scoped, ready for the detailed reviews to be undertaken during 2023. Despite the longer-term challenges, I'm pleased that we are able to bring forward a budget that maintains all core services, increases capacity for project delivery, and also the ability to supplement some core teams which have seen increased demands. It also proposes some important investment plans that will benefit residents across our district. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Many thanks, Councillor Power. Councillor Wallace, would you like to come forward and have your public participation stint?
Thank you, Chair, for your flexibility. Right, I had 4 points I wanted to raise, so I'll go through them. So first one was on greener, faster. I fully support additional funding for going greener, faster, as reports show that the Council is falling behind its plan. In fact, there are good arguments that the funding should be an order of magnitude greater. However, I have concerns about the focus on reducing the Council's own carbon footprint. Applying the funding to district-wide initiatives is likely to have a bigger impact, as carbon emissions produced in the district are orders of magnitude greater than the carbon produced by the Council itself. Second one's on regeneration. The report is asking us to, my understanding of the report is that it's asking us to approve another 300k for the central Winchester regeneration and station approach projects, but without providing the business case to enable the council to make an informed decision. I've seen this in quite a lot of committee meetings, and I would urge officers to consider how presentations of requests for project funding can be improved. On several occasions now, I've seen requests for more funding put before council, before one of the committees, and it's often not clear whether this is to release funds that have already been allocated to the project or whether it's to approve new funding. Either way, in order to approve release of any funds, it is important to understand whether the project's on schedule, on budget, and delivering what is expected. How can the council approve more funding without understanding whether or not the new activity is within plan, or if it's not, being briefed on the reason for the deviation and whether this still delivers a viable business case? Third point is on the council worker pay upgrade. Just a comment, is it appropriate to uplift all the grades by one step, or should it just be for lower grades? I'm sure this is something that the committee will want to debate. And the final one is on town accounts versus the general fund. How is it decided which fund is used to pay for different activities? There appears to be disparity between what we're asking parish councils to pay and what the town council is being asked to pay. In the rest of the district, parish councils pay for clerk costs and office rent, alongside all the costs that we see in the town accounts, such as for recreation grounds. So who pays for the equivalent of the clerk and the office space in the city? Moreover, we've already noted that the community safety team are paid out of the general fund and the HRA budgets inside the city, but the equivalent roles are funded by parish councils in the villages. Hopefully, well, you can clarify for me then afterwards, it'd be great. Bus shelters and street scenes for Winchester are specifically called out in this report. Are these being funded by the general fund or from the town account? Who would fund these activities in the rest of the district? So it's just trying to get some clarity on where all these things are going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. If you can turn off the microphone, it didn't go off when you tapped it. Thank you. Councillor Powell, did you want to come in there?
I'd like to very much, Chairman. Thank you very much. First of all, the question of greener, faster across the district. There's a tension there. You do not have responsibility without authority, and you do not have authority without responsibility. The two are hand in hand. So by taking action as the council to address our carbon footprint, we are leveraging examples we can show to other sources of carbon within the district. And I hope we do that throughout by our use of electric vehicles, by our use of better recycling, by our retrofit programme, which I think is going to be immensely valuable to people who own their own houses, to get that experience of what works, how much it costs, how much it takes to pay off the investment. And we know that that latter figure is a movable feast. So I think throughout our carbon reduction initiatives, we have always concentrated and said to officers, please publicise the results, quantify the results, so that other people can learn from what we are doing. I would be very reluctant to make any financial investment in assets that are being managed by other people. I don't think it's a proper way to use council money, other people's money. If we don't retain control of the asset and get to actually benefit from that reduction in carbon. The second question was about regeneration. Now, our regeneration programs have always been very long term. We do know that further funding will be required, but before we go forward with that further funding, we have milestones and checkpoints, and those are addressed at the Regen Cabinet. Also, the expenditure of that sort of level of money is essentially a decision at the Cabinet level rather than at the council level. It's in this budget for completeness. But I wasn't able to listen to the Regen meeting this morning. I'm sure that was addressed. Now, the pay upgrade, it's not just about giving people a bit more money in their pocket. It's also about giving them another level to progress to on the scale for that job that they're doing. And I think that's really important. And we have retention problems at all levels of council staff. Without our staff, we can't implement any of our plans, and we need to demonstrate that we value them. So I'm quite happy to hear your arguments on that one. Now, the town account. I remember that at the last audit meeting, and we looked at the town account, and we said that we would include a figure for how much was being charged to Winchester Council for the services of running the meetings and managing the open spaces. And we don't seem to have that in the town budget for this year. So I can only apologise. I'm sure officers will have that added before we go to the full council meeting. Because we said we'd do it and we didn't. Now, capital expenditure. We've spent the money. This is what we do. We collect in the money, we collect SIL, and in response to either our capital programme or requests for SIL funding, it goes out of our general fund. Spending. Which question have I missed? Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Todd, you indicated you wanted to step in.
Yeah, the commitment to reserves, the 300,000, is preparation for a decision that is to be made in July. Those who did attend the Regen meeting this morning would have seen the word strategic case with a capital S and a C, which is, I think, the point that's being made. It is a formal decision-making process that is referred to, and the money is set aside because in June we will make or June or July we will make a decision on go no go to the next stage. And We run a gated process. At each gate that we go through on the decision-making process, we outline the expected expenditure that we're planning to do at the next stage of the programme. We also, on all our major projects, through the quarterly reporting process to this committee and to the performance panel, report on progress versus budget and deliverables and performance of the deliverables that you refer to. So the infrastructure, the decision-making processes are in place to provide the reassurance that you need. Yes, if you want to get real insight into how the regeneration programme is going, I would recommend coming to the Cabinet Regeneration Committee, where we'll talk about this in great depth. But performance panel and this scrutiny committee will be scrutinising the expenditure and the project progress and feeding into the formal process that we go to decide when and how projects proceed and how much budget should be made available for the next stage of each project.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Committee, coming to the report, we have the first part of the report up into the risk part, pages 85 to 96. Do we have any questions on that? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Power has responses to Councillor Wallace's questions. Mentioned that she didn't want council assets being managed by other people in relation to the greener, faster. Now, I'm concerned, I think similar way to Councillor Wallace, but got a bonus 2 million this year, and we're just shoveling it away when there's priority things we need to be spending it on, of which delivering greener, faster is definitely up there. And yet the proposals is to push money away and wait till some bills come in, or prepare to, as it says in the paper, use the money to cover the cost of carbon offsetting, managing the assets of the council by other people. So which is it? Do you want our assets, our problems to be resolved by other people, or to get on and do something about it?
I think it's easiest to deal with the carbon offsetting question first. We did have a paper coming to a meeting recently. I think it was the carbon reduction strategy, where we did say that buying carbon credits was very much the place of last resort. And I don't think that's buying carbon offsets is in that recommendation at all. Now, the question of assets being managed by other people, we manage our own assets and we retain control of the carbon reduction measures that we will be putting in place to bring down our carbon footprint. So I don't think I quite understand where we are abrogating our responsibility to manage those assets.
Well, if I may, I quote from the purpose of this paper under the heading of Greener, Faster. This reserve will enable us to explore the use of council assets for carbon offsetting. How are we using this money for carbon offsetting? Why?
Well, I've given a simple example. The Barfield car park generates more energy than it uses. And that is enabled. We can offset that energy to other uses of electricity that we have in other places. So if we cut, looking at me baffled. Similarly, if we reduce phosphate output through use of adjustments to sewage plants or other types of interventions, we can create phosphate and nitrate credits.
You're suggesting then that generating electricity through our own resources is now offsetting what you just seem to imply.
I think the phrasing you need to look at is the use of council assets for carbon offsetting. So we're not talking about going out and buying offsetting credits. What we're saying is we generate energy or we reduce energy consumption and thereby it offset the energy that is used in other places. That's the intention. And if the phrasing is unclear, I apologise, but that's very much the intention. The intention, this is a source of funding that we will use to accelerate our programme and reduce, let's not forget that reducing our own carbon also reduces the district's carbon. So it's a 2-for-1. And this is our immediate priority in line with previous commitments made.
Is that clear, Councillor Godfrey?
There are related questions, but I'll just take a breather.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that first part of the report? No? Okay, coming on to the supporting information then, pages 97 to 109. That's the whole second half of the report. Does anybody have any questions on that second half of the report? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I note on page 99 our support for Trinity and Beacon. The commitment is still there, but we're changing how we fund that, and we're using the homeless prevention grant. The slight concern is that the homeless prevention grant is subject to annual government decisions, and therefore are we saying in this that although that's fine for now, obviously we can't necessarily guarantee that going forwards. So just because of that change in how we manage that money, does that therefore make that commitment to two organisations who, without their support, we would have a lot of other elements to comply with as a council, could be under some uncertainty. I'd be grateful for clarification, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed, it does say that the proposal is to fund those core housing grants from the homelessness prevention grant, and it is subject to annual government decisions. There's no indication that that funding will disappear. Clearly, homelessness is still a key priority for government, as it is for us. But the amount of that funding each year, we have to wait for confirmation from government for that. But should that funding disappear, then that would be a decision we would have to make around our base budget in the future going forward. But just to clarify, there's no indication of that funding stream disappearing.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler first.
Just two points. One, to prove that I've read the paper. 13.4 says growth items included in Appendix A. I think it should be Appendix B. And my other question really more was on page 102, 13.12C. I just can't actually understand the sentence. I just wonder if it could clarified as to what it actually means.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just trying to get there. 13.2.
13.12. Should be. I suspect that might be the case, but it's still.
Yes, in existing growth areas.
So they've got in. Oh, sorry, so the if should be an in existing growth areas in the ground. Yeah. Sorry, it's an in, not an if or an of.
Sorry, Councillor Cutler, I didn't know. I didn't quite note down whereabouts the reference to Appendix A should be reference to Appendix B.
Sorry, I should have put that.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Cremoyson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 detailed questions. I'll just ask the first and I'll come back in later if there's time. So the first is about the service contracts. As I understand it, there's provision for the contractor to increase charges based on certain criteria, things like when fuel prices went up, that sort of thing. And correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I wonder what provision in the contracts is there to lower the charges when fuel prices start coming down? Just want to understand, you know, if it's a two-way street. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very little scope for that. The contract is an increase by CPI. So now that it increased by CPI in September at 10.1%, we are now locked into that within that contract, within that BIFA contract.
Okay, so I misunderstood it. It is just based on CPI and it's right. Okay. Thank you.
Apologies. Before we have any more questions, I just want to clarify with the Section 151 officer the reference to Appendix A and Appendix B, if I may.
Yeah, just to clarify, it was intended to reference Appendix A just because Appendix A sets out the whole of the budget for next year. But Councillor Cutler is right that those budget options are also referred to in Appendix B.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions, but I could start on the first. 13.2 makes reference to be savings being taken from a strategic budget review. Last year's budget, we heard about the strategic budget review and how this was going to be looking at all the services and the way the council ran over this last 12 months before delivering a significant level of saving to reduce expenditure or increase income over the next 12 months by £2 million a year. At the moment, we've got a figure of £100,000 being included in this budget. I wonder if we told how that money is being made up, that 100,000, and what progress there is on delivering the strategic budget review savings.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we identified the budget review work in the paper that came to Cabinet in November. The areas of work being done, those projects have been scoped now, and I believe they are in the process of being commissioned. There was a delay. We had a war in Ukraine. We had a cost of living crisis, which continues. And I'm afraid we did not get along with that work as quickly as we would have wished. But it is now in hand. I believe now we have a full complement of strategic directors. They are taking a grip on this, and I expect the work to be starting soon. Is that fair?
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. Several numbers I'm just picking up in the paper, just seeking clarification. The Regen project staff, an additional member of staff on page 100, 130,000. Is that someone to work across all of the regeneration projects? Because obviously we have a number. And 13.8 and 13.9 indicate additional monies for Central Winchester and strategic development advice. And also regeneration on page 103 has 300,000. Are those all separate incremental amounts of money, and therefore that's totaling £750,000 going to regeneration, with those various elements all added together, accepting that they may be proportionately for different projects? Am I interpreting all those numbers correctly? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, they are all separate figures, so the cumulative value needs to be taken into consideration.
So that's £750,000 going to Regen incrementally.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. If I can return to this greener, faster topic. I wonder if, tell me, what will be different? What will have improved over this next few months as a result of this expenditure or proposed squirreling away of the money? That will make will reduce carbon as a direct result of what's been included in this budget. We need to do things faster. We have this sensibly named expenditure line, but all it's doing is can't see what it's doing. What will be different as a result of this greener, faster?
We did have the roadmap the other day, Chairman, which unfortunately I was not able to attend all of. This is money we didn't expect to have. And therefore we did not have plans in place to spend this money. We now have to commission that work. We need to find out what is most cost-effective way to go forward. And we just need to get the work done. So I hope you will see results within a few months. But until that work is done, I'm not going to be able to give any costs or detail or the benefits.
Councillor Cromwell.
Thank you, Chair. As I've said before in previous committee meetings, I learn something new at every paper that I look at. And this time's big new thing was the bone store, which is a line item in somewhere in our accounts. And I didn't realise we had one. So that's fascinating. And I just wondered what value we're spending money on this. So I'm trying to understand what the value is. How is it used? Is it monetized in any way? Or is it effectively a repository for our museums that we might, or like most museums have a lot of stuff behind the scenes, paintings and all sorts of stuff, which are not out in public view. Is that effectively the role that it is performing, and it may be called upon at some point in the future? Just wondered if anyone can explain what the bone store is and so on. Thank you.
I must admit, I've not visited the bone store. I do know that it's part of our cultural assets.
Councillor Porter would like to speak on this one, I believe.
I'm delighted to hear it. But we also have quite a lot of paintings that cost us a lot to maintain and look after. And I recall the Ferrari when Southampton threatened to sell them off.
And we have bones and stones, actually. Whenever
in the same place,
nearby to each other, whenever an archaeological dig is done, the bones and the stones have to be stored, and they're stored forever. And until relatively recently, they were stored for free. So once a developer has dug them up, we keep them, and they're kept for free. And I actually only asked Councillor Thompson the other day why we have to keep them, because actually they're managed by the Cultural Trust, as we've described in this paper. But I asked why we have to keep keeping them, and the answer is because carbon dating and way in which the age and the condition of these bones and stones is judged is improving year on year, and so someone in future times may wish to DNA them, or they may wish to recarbon date them so that we know more about them. So at the moment, that's what we have, and that's what's costing us money. And they're kept in not that brilliant a condition in stores which need to be climate controlled. And that obviously is not the easiest thing to do. They're also down there with stuffed animals, clothes, all sorts of things that are kept as part of the museum service work, some of which are Hampshire County Council and some of which are Winchester City Council. So when you're asking about storing bones, that's what they are.
So if I take up a hobby in taxidermy and get bored of it, can I store that in the
Not
stuffed
anymore,
animal
but you
box?
could have done in the 1950s. There are some stunning displays there, and actually I only know about this because I withdrew an eel, a stuffed eel, which went to the eel house in Alsford. But it is a very serious problem because actually it's a bit like a cemetery, but they're not in the ground really. We still have to maintain them.
Thank you.
Sadly, we don't have anything of the quality of the Hayling Island swamp cat, which is held by the Hampshire collection in their stuffed animal collection. Worth Googling.
I'm sure that Mr. Taylor might have a bit more to say about that, but
I can, through you, Chair, of course. The council often makes a requirement to those that undertake archaeology as part of a development agreement that the bones are stored and dated and preserved. And as it is our requirement, then we store them. However, they are all catalogued, they are boxed, they are available for viewing by students should they require it, but it is our obligation to keep them safe, and they are in a storage. However, we have an ongoing project and dialogue with the Hampshire Cultural Trust about appropriate storage in the appropriate places for our cultural relics, of which the bones are just one section. Thank you.
and I can say it's also done respectfully.
Thank you, Councillor Crimoyson, for sharing your learning and allowing that to be discussed in a public forum. Any other questions on the second part of the report before we move on to the appendix? Oh, yes, Councillor Crest, apologies. I got carried away with my taxidermy.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just on page 100 and the salary increases, not questioning the need to address salaries at all, just wondering about the uplift of all grades by 1 spinal column point. If that's not a blunt instrument, just looking at the appendix, just wondering if the cabinet members considered it's fair and equitable in the way that it's being handled. Some of the jumps, not sure they're completely fair, but just interested in if that analysis has been done to make sure it's appropriately sophisticated enough.
Councillor Todd.
Yes, the work is to look at the point increase. So there's a range of reasons why we obviously look at pay. There was a reference earlier by on the subject of should we be focusing more on people on lower grades? The local council standard increase this year was a flat rate, which was designed to have exactly that effect. This change is essentially designed to look at our competitiveness in terms of recruitment and retention. So it is something that affects all grades of the council in terms of us being able to retain people and recruit people and not lose out because of what can often be surprisingly small differences in terms of seeking to recruit and retain the best people to work for the council in Winchester. So that's why we've done it the way we have. It's serving a different purpose. It's serving a very particular purpose, which is in the context of making a permanent change relative to where we sit on the national spinal column, to ensure that we have improved our competitiveness versus other authorities in Hampshire and versus other employers in the Winchester district.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. A point of clarification. We know that there are going to be new regulations for waste and recycling, particularly on food, and we're indicating that we need to put £500,000 away, given that we're not sure of how that will all go, and clearly we want to embrace those new changes. If I recall, though, we did have money put aside for part of this work previously. Have we used that? We were going to do some testing, some trials, and I don't know whether we've done that or whether that money still exists and will be added to this. So we've got a bigger pot for the proposals once we know exactly what we're expected to do. So just to clarify, did we do the trials or have we held that and this money is incremental?
As far as I know, we haven't done the trials. And I believe it was 130k, but Mrs. Keys will confirm. And I think it was 130 last year. No, no. Okay.
The decision was taken in the context of obvious lack of clarity in terms of how much funding we are due to get for central government in order to implement the likely collection changes. We're bound to get some. There is there are the new packaging charges basically being introduced, a proportion of which will come back to us. But put it mildly, it's not clear that all of the costs we're likely to incur will be will be reflected in the amount that we receive, which will inevitably be done according to some national formula of some kind. The money that was put aside last year, we had a careful look to see what was the right way to introduce food waste collections. The idea was for a food waste pilot. And it became clear that a pilot was not the most efficient way to do it, and we would be better with a full rollout later in the process. I think the way it was done, but I would need guidance from the Section 1151 officer on this, was as a one-off identified payment, a budget line. So I think it wasn't specified as a reserve. We're doing it slightly differently this year. And so therefore, if we get to the end of the year without spending it, it goes back into the general fund. I don't think there's an earmark line carryover, but it's possible we may have decided to carry that over, but I'm sure we can get clarification of that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. So 12 months ago, a budget was created, 150,000 for food waste trial feasibility to look at rolling that out. As Councillor Todd has just explained, that hasn't happened, but that has been wrapped up with additional money that was set aside at the time around climate emergency and transport, and that's being invested. That's being used towards the HVO fuel for refuse vehicles, and also for additional support for the Project Integra Future of Waste and Recycling projects. So it was a one-off budget that was created 12 months ago, and where it hasn't been feasible to spend that this year, that will be rolled forward and ring-fenced for those works due to happen now.
Thank you. Any other questions on the second half of the report before we move on to the appendices? No. Appendix. One moment, checking if it's A or 1. Appendix A this time. Any questions on Appendix A? Appendix B then on page. Oh, Councillor Harrell.
Chair, can I just clarify, when we looked at the budgets at the end of last year, we had different inflation rates for the HRA and the general fund. Just clarifying with Mrs. Keys that we've got consistency now across all of the budgets for the expectations and various inflation levels. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. We've made sure that it's a standardised assumptions for both the HRA and general fund.
Thank you. Appendix B then on page 113. Appendix C, any questions on that one? No. What about Appendix D, the Winchester Town account? noting that you've already clarified that we'll get the transparent figures in there.
That my understanding, and I speak as member of the Winchester Town Forum Town Account Group, is that the extra costs and overheads are actually already included, except they're included line by line as you go through. So I think it's questionable, which is how it's currently accounted. So I think it's questionable whether reorganising the accounts at this stage in the process is something that we would
I
particularly.
refer you to your colleague, Councillor Power, on this one. Councillor Todd.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It was agreed last year that it would be a footnote as to how much was included. And Mrs. Keys is telling me that it's in there somewhere. Must admit, I can't see it either.
Yeah, on the second page, there's an asterisk next to total cost of services. And the asterisk just underneath says to note that the cost of services includes staff costs of approximately £400,000 in total for 23-24. That's on page 72. No, it's not. It's the second page of Appendix D. Thank you.
And Chairman, that was in response to a very valid objection by the parishes that they couldn't see any staff costs in the town forum and were they all subsidising them? And that's why that note was added.
And the answer is no, they're not.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Any other questions on Appendix D? No. Appendix E, do we have any questions there? Appendix F? And Appendix G? No questions? Okay, do we have any debate on this paper? No debate? Righto. Well, the only notes I've taken are to add in town forum costs and charges. Well, I can knock that one off because we've just had the discussion that they're there. That in 13.12C, 200k if should actually be 200k in. Have I missed any other specific action points?
No, not at all, Chair. As with the last paper, I would merely say that the following points were requested for clarity by the committee tonight and were answered, which is the charging of staff time to the Winchester Town Forum account, clarity sought on the ongoing support for the voluntary sector, which is currently drawn down from the homelessness reserve, clarity sought on regeneration investment profile, clarity sought on the changes to the main grade scale for staff, and clarity sought on the funding and implementation of changes to the waste and recycling service, particularly food waste. But all those matters were answered this evening. And as you point out, Chair, there's a correction in paragraph 13.12C.
Many thanks, Mr. Taylor. So coming back to the recommendation that the committee comment on the proposals attached within the report. We've done that. Councillor Wallace, you've had your questions answered. Are we happy to move on to the next item? Many thanks. So coming on to the capital investment strategy now, starting on page 133 of your packs. Again, Councillor Wallace, we will ask Councillor Power to introduce and then you can come forwards and ask your question. So this is Ref Cab 3389. Councillor Power, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This report sets out the Council's capital spending programme, the principles which underpin this in order to deliver the outcomes as set out in the Council plan. It gives details of the overall programme for the next 10 years, how it is financed, the governance around it, the appetite for risk, and the impact on the Council's medium-term financial strategy. The capital programme totals 470 million over the next 10 years, 337.4 million for the general fund, and 432.6 million for the HRA. Appendix A provides the capital programme by project divided into approved for spend, subject to appraisal, Key projects and changes to this programme also detailed in the report. Strategy sets out the approval process and the project programme management protocols. It also includes in the body of the report and Appendix F several prudential indicators as required by the SIPFA Prudential Code and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Is that department still the same name? I'm not quite sure. Statutory investment guidance. I look forward to your questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Councillor Wallace, would you like to come and ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just some clarification around the SIL funding. Per the latest data that I have available, £8.6 million of SIL has been collected in the southern wards, but only 2.2 million has been allocated to that area, mainly the 15% that automatically gets allocated to parish councils. SIL is set on new development in order to raise funds to help fund the infrastructure, facilities and services needed to support new homes and businesses. Thousands of homes have been built in the southern wards and infrastructure improvements are needed to support those new developments. However, the report appears to show that Winchester Council is only offering up to 0.3 million in SIL funding projects in 2023-24. Even if all this funding was allocated to the southern wards, it would take 21 years for the southern wards to receive SIL grants equivalent to the amount that those areas have contributed. What am I missing? I suspect this is probably me. The other question, I'm still waiting a response to a query I raised at the Cabinet meeting in November, where the officers took an action to confirm why the general fund reserves were reducing from 38 million in April 2022 to 25 million in March 24. This is a substantial reduction and therefore it's important that the council is clear on the reasons. So it's not, I couldn't necessarily match up the numbers with the latest data, but I was going back over my notes and I realized I hadn't had an answer to that query. Thank you.
Thank you. May I come back on the SIL comment? So we spoke about SIL at full council 2 council meetings ago, and Councillor Todd suggested that he was happy to speak to me about SIL going forwards. Since then, Councillor Porter has had a panel to discuss SIL going forwards, talk about how we currently do it and how we will do it going forwards, because I think they're tired of me turning up to Cabinet meetings saying I'm very disappointed that. And Councillor Porter has certainly opened up that conversation, has taken all of the feedback on board and is reviewing how that process goes. So whilst I completely appreciate your question and support it and the lack of funding, that one is in progress. And I think we should just sit on that one and park it if you don't mind and ask it if we don't like the result. Is that okay, Councillor Power, with answer to that one?
I'm absolutely delighted. I mean, we want more parish applications to come forward. That's what the money is for. It is for delivering infrastructure. And I know that Councillor Porter would like to see more applications from those parishes.
Just following on from that, Councillor Wallace, it was also discussed with Councillor Porter that we'd quite like parish councils to pair up and come up with some of the bigger projects for the bigger spends. That would be really helpful. That would benefit a wider area in the southern districts. So we're all asked to support that. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, for your awareness, that I think there are only 2 wards that haven't underspent. The biggest underspend is in St Paul ward. The second biggest underspend is in Bishop's Wolf, and the third is in St Barnabas. So it's a problem right across the entire district. One other piece of work that is useful to be mindful of is that county councillors of all parties have made it clear to the administration at Hampshire that we think that they are also underusing the opportunity presented by SIL, and so there is now work going on at Hampshire to work out how they can use or apply for SIL funding to drive ahead some of the infrastructural improvements that I think we'd all like to see. So it is a 2-prong approach, but the administration is very serious about wanting to build on the ideas that you and others have raised in terms of how we can use community infrastructure levy more effectively. And we're also having those wider conversations to ask Hampshire, how they can also start to factor it more into their thinking in terms of driving ahead infrastructural improvements, walking, cycling, other changes that are needed.
So thank you, Councillor Wallace, for raising that one. Councillor Power, to address the second point regarding reserves.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we've spent it, which is what reserves are for. Mrs. Keys very kindly has produced a list of what we've spent it on. You would like the detail?
Yeah, so it was planned use of reserves. There was approximately 7.5 million, mostly of community infrastructure levy, which was used to fund capital expenditure. King George V Pavilion, the car park at the Dean, to name a couple of projects, or will be used over that time period. About £2 million for Central Winchester Regeneration Project, about 1.5 million for project delivery and transformation, 1.3 for the new homes bonus funded projects, one-off projects from 12 months ago, £1 million for homelessness, and just over £500,000 for climate emergency. So it was a planned reduction and a planned use of those reserves to fund expenditure.
That answer your questions, Councillor Wallace? Thank you for your time this evening. Really appreciate it. Committee. Coming on to the paper, pages 133 to 144. Do we have any questions on the first part of that report, please? No? Okay, covering supporting information from pages 141 to 149. Do we have any questions on that part of the paper? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, two, if I may. The River Park Leisure Centre, the £2 million that we have put aside for the demolition of that building. But obviously the expectation, as I understand it, is that that would be covered by the receipt in due course that we receive for that building. But at the moment, it's costing us because we're having to sort of take remedial action. Where are we, therefore, on ensuring that that capital receipt is processed so that it's not continually costing the council money to maintain that building? And then the other question I have is on 149 Central Winchester. And the report says it is not anticipated that the council will be making further capital investment in CWR, but it is expecting to put its assets into the scheme. Now, having been party to buying those assets back at some considerable expense so that we could actually amass land to be able to develop the scheme, I'm slightly concerned with what I read there as to our intentions. It may be premature for some of the assumptions I'm making. However, that seems quite a bold statement to make. So I'd be grateful for clarification on both of those. Thank you.
On Central Winchester, the word put is doing quite a lot of work there. I don't think it's meant to lead to a firm conclusion as to the exact financial structure that we'll be talking about in the long term, which will come forward at a later date as part of the decision-making process. What we're saying is that those assets, in terms of our contribution to the project, obviously we will be making that land available for redevelopment. Otherwise, it would be a pretty rubbish redevelopment project with no assets made available for people to redevelop. That's all that's meant by that sentence. It's not making any statements in terms of the future financial arrangements, freehold, leasehold, and anything else that might go ahead. It's just saying these are assets that are part of regeneration, and that's all we're expecting to do from here on in, as opposed to our own capital spending.
Chair, can I just clarify then, if I may, if Councillor Todd is happy, we have assets that we're generating significant revenue from at the moment. For those to go into the pot, we will lose that revenue, certainly in the short term. and that is significant. Is it the intention that that gap will be covered in any deal that is eventually put together with the new partner to ensure that that loss of revenue is covered?
The decision-making stages that we will enter into will be very clear about the financial consequences. As you recall, the last round of outline business case and strategic outline business case, I can never quite remember which name, was very explicit, and a lot of the discussion about phasing and how the project was run was all around full recognition of that revenue and the importance of replacing it. So please be assured that in terms of assessing the way forward and the decision-making process for the way forward, the revenue that we currently achieve from the site is absolutely part of the decision-making process and something that will be absolutely critical to deciding how the project proceeds. So that is absolutely within the scope of what we're talking about. So the terms that are used there are just referring to the fact that the assets that we have in the area will be part of the regeneration project. The financial arrangements will be coming back at a later date as we move through the next gate in the process. But you know, we would not be doing due diligence if we didn't make sure that we had a very clear view of what the financial turn or the financial consequences of any decisions we make would be. I don't know if Chief Executive or anybody else has any further comment to that, but I hope that's clear enough.
Through you, Chair, the leader has set out the position exactly. The council is a landowner in the area. We will need to work through a decision making and a financial model to bring about the best outcome for the district.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on that second part of the main report? Okay, moving on to then the financing the capital programme, page 150 to 161. Do we have any questions on that? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. In page 152, 11.4.2, the graph. Could Councillor Power tell me what elements of the capital programme will deliver this very welcome positive benefit to the general fund in terms of the impact on the income?
Who would like to pick that up? Neil, it looks like we're coming to you.
Thank you, Chair. To be fair to Councillor Power, there's I prepare this graph, and there's a lot of information that goes into it. It's an aggregate of the whole capital programme and the revenue consequences thereof. So there will be elements such as, for example, savings if we increase the solar array on city offices. We'll make savings on energy, which will input into that. There are also assumptions around, for example, there's a capital disposal from the development of the new surgery, and we've assumed for budgeting purposes that we can use capital receipts to reduce our overall borrowing requirement. So if we apply that to existing borrowing, we can reduce the minimum revenue provision that we have to make every year in revenue. So without looking at my detailed workbook, I can't give you every single specific input into that, but it's an aggregate overall. Probably the biggest is the disposal that's going in there for that future year's benefit.
I may. I'm grateful to Mr. Aiken for explaining what he explained to me last week. I wasn't asking because I didn't know the answer. I'm asking because I'm worried that, like Councillor Power did at the penultimate audit committee, she's presented a paper which she hasn't read. And I wonder if that means that within the appendices, Councillor Power, how do you know if you don't know which part of the programme is going to deliver significant financial benefits to the coffers, which are the high priority elements of the programme that you should be pushing ahead with? I'm concerned that there's a disconnect between the expenditure and the benefits.
Kevin, thank you. As Mr. Aiken said, this is a conglomerate of many decisions. We do look at every single project on the basis of the business case for that decision. The machinations of the capital fund have many underlying factors which only Mr. Aitken actually has a grip on, and I rely very heavily on staff in this matter. I have read the paper, thank you.
Thank you. Coming back to you, Councillor Horrell, I'm aware that the second question that you asked earlier wasn't answered. Could you restate the question, please?
It related to River Park, the £2 million set aside for demolition, but that will be offset by the capital receipt, which I think Councillor Power was nodding at. But the question is, at the moment, obviously, it's costing us to manage that property. So as that gap continues, so my question was about timing and also the costs associated with the maintenance of that building, which in theory we don't actually want long term.
Obviously, the legal processes that we've been engaged in have led to some delays, and not just the extra legal costs that are a consequence of such activity, but also the extra costs of maintaining a derelict building for longer than we would have liked. There is ongoing discussion with the University of Southampton about the financial arrangements, and we are also in active conversation about the next stage of the plan.
Chair, can I ask then, are we looking actively to recover some of those additional costs that we're having to cover because of some of the delays? Is that in part of the negotiation?
I can't really comment on conversations between ourselves and the University of Southampton, which are commercially confidential. Suffice it to say, though, that any negotiation from their perspective will be about the value of the site and the value of the project. And if there are delays as a result of other activities, it's hard to see how that would factor into their decision making in terms of the project.
Many thanks. Does anybody have any other questions on the last part of that report? We'll move on to the appendices. No? Okay, moving on to Appendix A. No questions on Appendix A. Appendix B. Nope. Appendix C. Appendix T. E. Anything on Appendix X? F. F. At least you're all awake. Appendix G. No? Do we have any debate on this paper? And no debate. Okay, I have noted no specific actions coming out of this paper. Many points of clarification, which I won't make Mr. Taylor read. Were there any actions, though, that you saw coming out of it? No. Okay, well, we've discussed the paper. Thank you for the points of clarification to Ms. Keys, to Neil with your conglomerate graph. Councillor Power and Councillor Todd. We've aired that paper and we shall move on to the next item. Many thanks. So moving on to item 11, to note the work programme for 22-23. Is everybody happy to note that? Agreed. And to note the latest forward plan of key decisions. Have we all looked at that and noted? Agreed. Okay, in that case, the meeting is now closed and it's 9:17. Thank you ever so much for your engagement this evening. Safe travels home. Hopefully it's not too icy yet. Thank you.